A very good evening to everyone. We at Sushant School of Art and Architecture, Ansal University, are happy to welcome you to the webinar on decoding the Haveli. At the very onset, I would request everyone to please turn off their mics while a speaker is speaking for better audibility. I am Suruchi Shah, Conservation Architect and Assistant Professor at SSA. We are pleased to introduce this as first of our multitude of events as a part of the SSA Heritage Watch 2020 program. This is under the Gurgaon Living Lab initiative of the Masters of Architecture at SSA. About this, my colleague will speak further as we go ahead. The event is an endeavor of Masters in Architecture Built Heritage program at SSA.
Good evening. I am Neha Malik, Conservation Architect and Assistant Professor at SSA. We are pleased to introduce, to give you all a brief background. Sushant School of Art and Architecture is a premier institution in architectural education since 1989. Under the MArch BH program, we have very enthusiastically been working with built heritage on ground, encouraging the students to engage with realistic issues, stakeholders, and opportunities. With our emphasis on lost typologies of built heritage every year, this year we focus on chopals and havelis. Today we will explore and engage with different aspects associated with the havelis. We will soon announce our next webinar on lost typologies of chopal as well.
Neighbors sitting on the otlas outside chit-chatting, the ever-changing ambience of the courtyard through the day. We have all seen such images at some point or the other. But what is the fate of these Havelis now in the ever-changing built landscape? Different regions have different styles of Havelis and different terminology of spaces as well. Today, we will decode the Haveli in terms of its configuration, systems, values, as well as its relationship with the users. These will be spread across the webinar today and discussed in detail by our esteemed panel of speakers.
I would first like to introduce Dr. Shikha Jain for the opening address. Dr. Shikha Jain is a graduate from SPA Delhi with a master's in preservation and community design from KSU, USA. Her doctoral work on Havelis of Rajasthan from De Montfort University, Prasada, UK, received the IIA Research Award in 2004 and was published as a book. She is founder director Drona since 2003 and state convener Intac Haryana chapter since 2010. Welcome, Dr. Shikha Jain.
For inviting me today to this very interesting discourse on Havelis. The subject is particularly close to my heart because it was part of my doctoral work. And I would, since we are very short of time, I would just like to start with the presentation itself. I assume, Suruchi, you would be the one displaying the presentation?
Yes, so I'll be switching the slides.
You can just wait till I tell you to move to the next slide.
Yeah.
So it's a house form that dominated the urban fabric of North Indian towns for about 5 centuries, roughly from 1550 to 1950. Its earliest origin in India can be dated to the Mughal period around the middle of the 16th century, and subsequently it became the symbol of the aristocratic house across the northern Indian subcontinent, primarily in the Indian states of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Delhi, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, parts of Bengal, and across the border in Pakistan and Bangladesh. The origin of this term is often mentioned from the word hawala, meaning partition, or havale, meaning land, like the English term estate. As we see in the maps of Mughal Suba of Ajmer, which mentions Jodhpur Ba Haveli, Nagaur Ba Haveli, or Ranthambore Ba Haveli, showing the allocation of lands for these different areas. While Haveli has been researched a lot in its physical and metaphysical forms or climatically, I'm going to right now focus on how there is a transformation from the bygone Havelis to the present day apartments, and specifically into the existential and anthropological inquiries of the spatial aspect of Havelis. Next slide. So Ruchi, next slide.
Yes.
So if we look at the slides, there is, as architectural students, we are, taught to perceive design in a manner that we get an area and in which, if you see the approach A, that courtyard space is carved out in the center. But what I'm trying to explain is how, if we look at it anthropologically and understand how this Haveli form may have emerged, then it's actually the Indian way of designing, which emanates from the center outwards. So which is the approach B, where you have where one is actually the house, where you reside and do everything, or the courtyard, and other peripheral areas come around it as per requirement or needs. They are more functional, but actually your essence of the house is one. So next slide, Suriji. Looking at the beginning, how it was the rural origin, we started from the bara, which is, like an enclosure of some sorts, and then entire activities would be performed in this open area, but then you have small stores and small spaces for maybe even if it rains, then you go and sleep there, or at night time, and then you have that round structure which is basically for storage of grains. And how you can see, as if you go through the arrows, how this form finally evolved into the single courtyard Haveli, looking at the demarcation of the spaces inside as per requirements, and finally into a double courtyard and a multi-court Haveli. Next slide. So this is even evident, if you look at how the term bara itself, which means an open space, and in different areas across India, the term sort of changes but has a similar meaning. Like you have the Wada in Maharashtra, and similar terminology in a lot of other areas. And how this center of the court or the bara is demarcated with the entrance, and also in the surrounding areas that come around. And they are actually evolving from the bara itself. So you have a triple, opening space, like a semi-covered space, the tibara coming all around, and then the four walled enclosure with four open areas, which is the open windows, which is the chaubara. So bara or badi, in fact, mean an opening, which could be the smallest opening, like a small window, or it could be the entire chalk area or an open space. And you also see the earlier storage areas of rural, in the rural settlement that we saw, the rural house form, which is now converted into kotha, or the areas for grains, so completely enclosed. And this is how it is used in most old Havelis. Next one. And if we start looking at the cultural rituals and symbols, we realize that Havelis or house forms in India were basically, they show rituals and related to festivals, birth of a son, marriage of a daughter, or any other auspicious occasion, which are symbolically represented both in the center of the courtyard, which is the most sacred space of the house, and also on the door itself. Like you see on the left, you have a torna, which indicates that a daughter in the family has got married. And then you have the right side where you see the Mahavira idol on the entrance gate. So even looking and standing outside at this Haveli, I can say that, okay, it is a Jain Haveli. And looking at the other one, I can say, okay, our daughter has married. So these serve like information boards, to the people passing by and announcing what has happened and to the world. Next one. The main living space or the space of celebration remained the courtyard, which was actually the house, in the Haveli. So you can see in this archival image how celebrations are held. And how they are demarcated again and again. The center is demarcated with rangoli or mandana patterns in each festival, depending on the ceremony. And there is the point, this is also the point of fire ritual, the center of the courtyard. And on the right side, you see a wedding in a Haveli happening sometime as late as 2014. And you can again see, the symbol on the floor, and also the celebration happening. Next. And this is a Haveli which is, since 18th century, the wedding ceremonies are still performed here in the center of the court, even though the owners themselves have moved out. There is a caretaker and they are living in another city, But whenever there is a wedding in the family, they come back here, and actually the center of the court is still demarcated as sacred, besides the puja space and the water space that existed in this courtyard. So it's to show how these spaces still exist. Next slide. This has been mentioned several times, of course, the ground plan of the Haveli or the Indian courtyard house, how it reflects the Vedi itself. And it is very evident in the way the rituals are performed, as we just saw in the previous slides. Next one. So what is interesting to see how this use of the Haveli spaces is reflected in its physical form, like the design of the courtyard elevations that seem to address the central court as the primary house space for living and celebrating. The study of the courtyard and exterior facades in the Havelis show how the innermost court is the most decorative one, with paintings, carvings, or other embellishments as per region, as you can see in this perspective sketch. And there are cases on site when the owners ran out of money and the exterior facade is often left incomplete. So it is clear that the construction of Haveli focused more from inside out rather than the other way around. So the owners would actually, mark the Haveli center, construct the inner courtyard first, decorate the inner facade, spend a lot of money, and then move on the outer areas. Next. The traditional construction techniques reflect a similar notion by marking the center of courtyard on site and performing the puja there before demarcating other areas and starting construction. And this aspect of designing from the center outwards is evident to the last details, such as the jali. So in interviews with the traditional jali makers, we found that there is, a similar system that you mark the center and move outward to generate the jali pattern, as would be in the mandana or rangoli pattern or in the construction of the entire Haveli. So it's a simple design process, which is very much, the Indian way of designing. Next. A study of the Havelis reveals how the center of the courtyard is repeatedly emphasized in the facades, be it single or multi-court Haveli, as you see in these two drawings, that the center of the courtyard is reflected in both the front facade with the entrance gate, and even both the courtyards and the side facades are emphasized as two centers. So again, this allows us to read the facade while we are walking around and actually relate it, or we can sort of interpret what kind of Haveli plan it would be if we understand the facade. Next. Even in case of asymmetric facade, like this lakeside view of the Amet Haveli in Udaipur, you feel that there may not be any symmetry or there may not be a center, but if you look at the next slide, the drawing clearly shows that the Haveli center exists in the center of the Zanana courtyard, where the fire ritual would be carried out. And if you see on the section on the side, it is also the highest point. But how this point is actually used to generate the entire design of the Haveli, extending into the Mardana, with both Mardana and Zanana at different levels, but overlooking the lake and also aligning with the entry right on top. So although this is a grand Haveli and looks asymmetric, but if we go through the anthropological understanding, we can understand how it was designed. Next. The locus of the traditional dwelling, as we see, or the center, is repeatedly emphasized by the owner's ritual practice, architect's construction practices, and the formal composition of the house. Next. And now we see the transformation of the Haveli and how it was impacted during the colonial times, because it's interesting to see how this house form changed. Can we move to the next slide from Haveli to bungalow? Okay, so despite centuries of intercultural exchanges, this house form survived as a Haveli to cater to the socio-cultural needs of society, but it started to lose its value with dominance of the British bungalow and finally disappeared because of this enforced adherence of colonial zoning in post-independence India. So you can see on the right side how the house form itself and the morphology of our town and settlements has changed because of the zoning that we started following post-independence, which was the colonial zoning. And on the left side, you see how a bungalow was designed. Next slide. It is interesting to observe these changes in the spatial use as well as the formal alterations from the Haveli to the bungalow, including some hybrid types. Now here we see a bungalow being used by a traditional Indian family, but it is not like the way the British bungalows were designed, you know, for where it was only the British Sahib and Mem Sahib who lived with their family and the, maids and all to take care of the children. This is a joint family. And again, you know, the spaces, use of spaces, it was not like that a bedroom is used like a bedroom as it was designed in the bungalow. You would have one big room being used where all the women would be staying and one big room where all the men would be staying. So even though the whole family has moved into the British bungalow, their way of living continued to be traditionally like in a Haveli. Next slide. And what happened to the wedding rituals? Of course, because the courtyard was thrown out and it became the outside garden in the British bungalow. So the Hindu wedding ceremonies, you know, this is an example of how it's taking place in a British bungalow in New Delhi. Next. And then, you know, there were also other interventions, of course, the car and the driveway that is required. This is an example of a Haveli bungalow hybrid during those times when these changes were happening. Next. Because the bungalow became, you know, the aristocratic house, so Haveli was replaced by that notion and the post-independence dream of an Indian family to own a bungalow with a driveway and a car. Next. So this is another example where you see the kind of houses that were built earlier. So you would have a courtyard, but at the same time, you also have a porch with the driveway. So again, a hybrid between the Haveli and bungalow, but that was the transformation when Indian families were, you know, retained the old, but yet they were moving into the Western lifestyle. Next, please. So in the post-independence scenario, when this bungalow form is translated into the government bylaws in Huda sectors or builders' colonies, the rectangular residential plots are left with only a small portion of built-up area between the front and rear setback. These prevalent rules often completely negate the possibility of a courtyard in the center or a veranda in the front. So a new hybrid residential form has mushroomed in Indian cities like Gurgaon, within the parameters of indigenous tradition and colonial zoning that is still being used by town and country planning. Next. So this is showing the kind of hybrid house today which exists, which is, you know, sort of a bungalow form, but even then the house owners cannot let go of increasing the boundary walls, and usually it goes higher and higher, of naming the Haveli in some ways, or even other traditional habits in designing the house. The traditional habit of washing hands after a meal, which includes, you know, the architects to include wash basin in the dining area, additional stores with the kitchen or the bedroom, which are often essentials, which were part of the Haveli. The puja or meditation space has to be definitely allocated. And most of all, despite having a complete Western layout with defined spaces like bedrooms, dining, and living rooms, the house owner still does not adhere to strict usage of these spaces. His use of inner spaces is still as flexible as it was when he lived in a Haveli. Thus, the master bedroom in most Indian houses today can very well be used as the dining place if the television happens to be located there, or it can become the living room if close family friends are visiting. He still has need for constructing a boundary wall and placing a nameplate on the house gate. His living room, so to say, next slide, please. This, of course, in terms of facades, there are several hybrids which are also defined by Gautam Bhatia, which is, you know, in terms of looks today, the house owner really wants something which could look anything between a Gothic villa to, you know, Marwari Haveli, and you are landing up with mixtures of these vocabulary. Next. This is again a post-traditional house in Gurgaon that borrows the colonial architectural vocabulary, but yet is engraved with the name Drishti by the Indian house owner. Next. And his living room, so to say, the courtyard of the house, has the TV screen where the serials showing Indian rituals remain as popular as ever. As we know, the Ramayana is back in this lockdown now. Next. And strangely, in this, this is the kind of apartments that we are living in today, where we have completely lost touch with the Haveli form. And yet, next, strangely, in this Italian villa or French chateau prototype apartment, the house owner still performs Hindu fire ritual of Griha Pravesh, while the fire alarm may need to be adjusted for this ceremony. His traditional way of living needs to be assimilated with his aspirations for Western conveniences and adaptations, and the architects need to understand this search for reconstructing identity of the dweller in the post-global world to achieve this ideal home. Next. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shikha Jain. That was a great insight into the Haveli, its form, the evolution, the hybrid styles. I'm sure the audience would have learned a lot from this. I now introduce Parul Munjal, Program Director, MARC BH SSA. Parul Munjal is a conservation architect and associated with SSA since 2011 as faculty member. She has recently submitted a PhD on built heritage of small and medium towns, approaches to conservation and use. I request her to tell us more about our initiative of lost typologies and the studies from the current MARCH BH SEM1 studio on Gurgaon Masani village, Mehelwada. Welcome, Parul.
Thank you, Suruchi. Thank you. And it's of course a privilege to be following Dr. Shikha Jain, in the order. So quickly now, coming on to these two things that you've been reading continuously, lost typologies and Gurgaon Living Lab. So I would like to begin with a short background about the initiatives so that we understand what this webinar is really a part of. Essentially, Sushant School of Art and Architecture has been engaging with history, heritage, and contextual design since its inception. But the establishment of our two-year program, Master of Architecture in Built Heritage, has given an opportunity to focus on built heritage in an even more immersive manner. Over the last 3 years, since we started the program, the Built Heritage team has been actively involved in generating awareness about built heritage through on-ground activities and outreach across various mediums. Our second semester studio is typically linked with the dual agenda of studying and developing proposals for lesser-known built form typologies, as well as creating about these among various stakeholders. These lost typologies are under threat, as the context and relevance of these is transforming in the urban environment. From Bowdies or stepwells in 2018 to sarais or rest houses in 2019, we now proceed to Havelis or mansions and chaupals or village community centers in 2020. So these are glimpses of the initiatives, the on-ground activities that we've been involved with, workshops with school children, print and social media, so dissemination across various media, flash mobs, nukkad nattaks. We've tried to use all kinds of possible avenues to send the message across. We've also conducted cleaning drives and community workshops. So this is a part of our Gurgaon Living Lab, which is interdisciplinary, collaborative research and action-oriented platform across the master's program at SA, which are built heritage, interior architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design. So Havelis and chaupals these are two common typologies across rural settlements, and many of these have been getting absorbed. These villages have been getting absorbed into urban areas in the form of urban villages. One such example is the Gurgaon Masani village that has been associated with Shila Mata. The deity of regional also sort of forms a part of the rural identity of Gurgaon. This faculty team of built heritage undertook a study of the village that has been undocumented till now and identified the Mehelwada as two significant structures representing the Haveli and Chaupal typology. Hence, this process actually enabled us to define the focus on the particular typologies of Haveli and Chaupal. The students are now developing adaptables for enhanced use proposals for these based on an intensive process documentation and stakeholder interaction prior to the COVID-19 lockdown. Despite the rapid transformation, the village still retains over 60 Havelis. Many of these are in use and others are locked away. Interaction with the residents reveals the challenge of lack of access to artisans and materials for repair using traditional techniques. This was taken up as a challenge by us and resulted in conducting a workshop that you can see on the screen with participation from the local community. This was for residents demonstrating use of lime for plaster repairs. It is this kind of an action-oriented approach that we have been working on and intend to continue. In the case of Mehelwada, the process of documentation literally involved getting our hands dirty as our students cleared off debris and cobwebs in parts of the structure to document it as best as possible. Without discussing any further details, I would like to now like you all to get a glimpse of Gurgaon Masani and Mehelwada, a palace haveli in Gurgaon. So this video presentation that has been prepared by the students of second semester MArch Built Heritage, Raman, Samvedna, Sabar and Shriya. So over to the students and thank you.
Thank you for this great presentation and kudos to our students' work. I now introduce you all to Yash Pratap Singh Shekhawat. Yash Pratap Singh Shekhawat is a conservation architect and an academician. Based in Gurugram, he holds architectural practice in the name of Tech Art Studio. Historic landscapes and built environments with a special focus on historical, sustainable development patterns have been his keen research domains, resulting into papers, articles, and books for the cities of Jaipur, Kishangarh, and Bikaner. He headed the research team for the Architectural Travel Guidebook on Jaipur, published in 2018. He has several building and urban level documentation projects to his credit. Yash is a visiting faculty at Sushant School of Art and Architecture, Ansal University. He has worked on conservation projects in Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan. Yash will be telling us about Havelis of Bikaner in response to context. Welcome, Yash.
Yeah, hello everyone. Suruchi, can I have my presentation, please? Okay, so this particular work was initiated when I was pursuing my post-graduation at SPA. And this work continued further till date. Even last year, I visited that place and started documenting some places, trying to get into a publication, into a book form. So let me start with the presentation. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm primarily concerned about residential heritage of Bikaner because it not only involves Havelis, which is also one of the important typologies, but it also includes other building typologies. Can I have? Yeah, so Bikaner is actually a medieval town of desert. It's a desert capital. It's a medieval town established in 1495 and subsequently emerged with the support of Mughals and subsequently with Britishers' support. The kings of Bikaner always had close associations with both the imperial forces. So interestingly, this particular map, the main important point is that the city which you see on the left bottom corner is actually the highest point, and the city starts growing towards the northwest part. And unlike any medieval Rajput capital, the rulers of this place are not inhabiting the settlement itself, but they are right outside the settlement, housed inside a fort. And the demography of this complete settlement is different because it only includes either merchants and traders and the servicemen, which are like providing workshops and all the services along the fringe of the city. And yes, even Brahmins sometimes as well. So because of this demography, it also hampers, or it also develops the particular building typology alternatively differently. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please? So essentially, this city was envisaged as a land port. And because this was actually on the edge of the desert and the greener part on the west, and the desert on the desert on the west, and the greener part on the eastern part of the region. And also it was like a place where the logistics, the commodities and the materials were stored and housed. So there was an emergence of new typologies in this place. So Haveli is one residential building, but yes, Caravanserai or Kothri is also another typology where the caravan was, because the major mode of transport was caravan. And so this is another residential typology which started emerging because that's where the offices and the staff lived of the traders and the merchants. Yes, because it's a desert capital, there are a lot of smaller houses also, which are like not even, sometimes the houses were 12 feet wide, which all had only a single series of rooms in behind. So there, I call them as makan because it's a simple structure, but they have elaborate facades in that place as well. Then with the colonial onset, a few typologies of kothis or bungalows also started emerging in this place. Primarily, I've tried cover Havelis. Yeah, next slide, please, Suruchi. So the essential difference, which I think Shikha also started explaining, that Haveli is in inward-looking planned building, whereas the coteries are somewhat which has setbacks on sides of it. So I tried explaining this on a very simple geometrical patterns, that Haveli has something which has a courtyard in the center or probably has courtyard in the edge. And these lines show that what kind of access they could have. So they had access in the center, they had access which was offset from the center as well. But essentially coteries had larger courtyards, and the gate sizes suggested what was a coterie, because it should allow a camel to enter, because that was a major mode of transport used for transporting commodities at that point of time. Can I have the next slide, please? So in transformation, all Havelis over a period of time went under transformation. They saw some kind of subsequently additions and alterations in this part, which might be, it might include the first kind of transformation can be, you know, adding floors on top, then adding a facade to the building, adding another courtyard, encroaching away some of the public space that has happened in past as well, and or partially annexing the upper floors. So there are a lot of buildings which shows different period transformations happening. And about the build form, so there are like the oldest kind of a build form which I found was like they had plain facade and lesser openings in front. So if you see that, because I'm focusing on openings in front, is because the ground story has very small openings except the main door, which got transformed in the later part of the settlement. Yeah, next slide, please. So that was the first essential buildings which start coming. The second phase of the building structures happening in this place, when the trade emerged as a very aggressive kind of the revenue earning thing for this particular place, they started having basements. The place started using basements for storage of commodities, storage of goods, storage of grains also at some places, if there were smaller houses not meant for, and sometimes even buildings had 2 double-storied basements here. So what you see over there, they essentially got a high plinth, and the lower stories were used for used as a basement for storage or other purposes, and the upper floors were the residential primarily. So there were buildings which had a plinth in front, and then the buildings start, and whereas some buildings, the plinth, there was a 0 setback and there was no forecourt happening in the building. Next slide, please. Next slide. Suruchi. So now there's a fact which I forgot to state, that this place had there was a Census of India statistics of late 19th century of Bikaner walled city, which said that the Bikaner walled city had a population of 9,000 people and 1,000 shops. So that is, you know, 1:9 ratio of population for shops is something which was not necessarily meant for self-consumption, but that means that it was a very thriving market of that point of time. And that is why I see that, you know, somewhere the city took me differently, because I have seen a lot of Havelis in Shekhawati and elsewhere also, but I see that most of the Havelis of this particular place have openings at a very lower level. So it means like these Havelis are safe within the walls of the city, or these Havelis are a safer place to live in. And that is why I don't see the ground floor as kind of a defensive structure, which happens in most cases of Havelis where you don't have openings of the ground floor. That is what I was trying to mention in the earlier slide, that the first phase of buildings in Bikaner didn't have so many openings. That means they were pursuing the defensive nature, but the later Havelis started having openings at a very lower level as well. That means the city became safer for people like these kind of rich traders to live in as well. In order to understand the construction system, I have actually tried capturing some of the demolished structures, so that for an architect, it's easy to understand sections. And this is a kind of a real section which I was able to get. Although it's really throbbing in my heart that such kind of beautiful Havelis, which are more than 300, 400 years old, been torn down. But that's the story, because sometimes these Havelis have beautiful facades, which is sold off for a lot of money, and that money can be used to generate a new building as well. That's the cost of these historic facades. So the story is that this particular place has calcified sand as the base of the settlement. The property of calcified sand is when you dig it out, you get concur out of it. Concur is something which it's a porous formation. It's a porous calcified sand, and that porous material was used for making a building block for this particular place. And if you put that conker into a lime kiln, it creates lime as well. So the building material, which was conker, was taken out from the earth from where the building was standing. There was clay used for packing those conker together into the wall, and these walls were plastered in lime, and the lime was also, they were getting it from there. And within 5-6 kilometers, 10 kilometers of radius, Bikaner also has a lot of sand pits. Pit sand is mined on that part. So it's kind of a complete sustainable pattern where they have used all the material which has come from 5-10 kilometers area, except the roof part, which was in upper floors, it was timber. So can I have the next slide, please? So it's basically the basement was arches, and it was used using a conker. It was a vaulted roofing system, and then the topmost floor had timber roofing. I've not used the interior images, which I will show you that later on as well. So this shows the kind of conker material you can see in the lower floors, and then you have bricks in the upper floors as well. So this place has these kind of elements which was used. Even this stone, red sandstone, which was primarily used in this particular place because it has a lot of red sandstone fascia buildings, comes out from a 15-20 kilometers far off place. So even that stone is not imported from far off lands. It's a Dhulmera stone. Can I have the next slide, please? This place is actually seen as a place with a lot of red sandstone facades, beautiful facades. They are primarily cladded material, or even if they are structural materials, they are kind of prefabricated structures. I'll show you in the later slides where I've used to show the elevations that how they can be prefabricated structures. So yeah, so there were a lot of typologies over a period of time started emerging in this. Like you see one of those kinds of traditional structures where you see the buildings have traditional facades, which is predominantly the kind of pattern which you see even in Jaisalmer, although the color of the material is different, and Jodhpur as well. They're similar, they're all desert areas, and they have similar kind of facade treatments happening. It was 300, 400 years old structures which have these kind of facades. Next, please. And later on, because this particular place had a lot of Marwadis as inhabitants of the city, and these Marwadis were also responsible for a lot of trade and commerce happening in the Ganges basin. And then later on, at the end of like 19th century, they moved on to Calcutta and started manufacturing hubs. So the influence from Calcutta and the influence of these traders with the Britishers started, being very obvious in their built structures as well. And they started, the facades, the material remained the same, the material remained the red sandstone, but the facade treatment started emerging with colonial arches, segmental arches, and the kind of Victorian decorations on the buildings, other than the traditional Jharokha patterns happening on the buildings. And there was a new typology which started emerging, where the built form of Calcutta style of buildings started also emerging in this place. So and there are some buildings which are named as Calcutta buildings as well, because they look alike any building in Calcutta. I think, can we move to the next slide? And subsequently, because obviously these people were traveling abroad, they were going to Europe for trade and commerce. So you see a lot of European influences with Victorian pattern I've already shown you, and there are a lot of other places, like the left two ones are the European influences, where you can see some Spanish or some those kind of influences happening in these buildings. Whereas the right side, the two have Art Deco as their motive of ornamentation on the facade, which emerged in the beginning, because in the beginning of 20th century and the middle of 20th century, a lot of Art Deco movement happened in this particular place. The best part is that the facade material remained the same. That sandstone was used, and the motifs of Art Deco treatment happened with white marble strips. So that's one of the unique aspect of this place, that they retain certain aspects of the Haveli Haveli concept and the facades, the kind of facade they were building with. And they started adapting it to the requirement of their times. Also, since these streets of this place is a little narrow, so you won't find good photographs of such kind of buildings. I've tried to capture them as much as possible. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is just a schematic sketching of the facade. That what I found out in that place was that they had certain kind of mathematical proportions happening in the facades, wherein some buildings had central axis, whereas some buildings had moved their axis from left to right. And these facades were actually had a very, fixed kind of a pattern. So not necessarily that these facades have to be, carved at the site itself, but they could be carved out somewhere else and, reassembled at its place, kind of a prefabricated structure for the facade kind of treatment. And that is the beauty of these facades. And that is why the one facade of a building may go to a price of 30-40 lakh, which is the cost of building a new house. So that's why there's a good incentive for the people who are still continuing to inhabit these buildings, that they can sell out the facades just for equaling the cost of construction they would have to have a modern lifestyle, which is still a debatable topic. And but this is the kind of beauty of these facades. This could be dismantled at this time also, and this could be reassembled, because they have not been packed with cement, they have packed with mud or lime, and that is easy to remove them as well from this part. Next slide, please. So I'm using an example of a typical kind of a haveli in Bikaner, and so basically they have a zero setback, and they start open out from within the building. So you have the basement is something which is visible, and I was saying that there are double height basements also. So you can see some kind of steps which goes from the higher basement to the lower basement, because you have very small opening to enter inside the first level of mezzanine level of the basement, and then you have another level at the basement. So basements are really deep there. The ground floor, you have a high plinth, so you have a steps. Then since the haveli is not centrally aligned, it has a right alignment. You have a drawing room which is going to be in the center and in the front part, and then you have rooms all around, arranged around the courtyard. Then when you go up, you see that there is the kind of it's kind of slowly unpacking itself from within. So the edges are intact, but the courtyard size increases as you go on from one level to another level. And the topmost level has few rooms, and probably the largest room would be on the terrace topmost floor, which should be the residential room of the owner of the haveli. Can I have the next slide, please? So because it was a very short span of time for the presentation, I did not use interior images of the structures as well. But this is what the context of a desert capital, where the havelis were being used for residential purposes. And obviously it has different sizes of courtyards compared to Jaipur, which is a composite climate context, Jaipur, Gurgaon, Delhi. So that's how these places came up. And I find it a very interesting point of view to understand these buildings, because they have very different stories to tell of very different times. Thank you.
Thank you, Yash, for the presentation.
Yeah.
So this gives me the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Ruchita Belapurkar. Ruchita Belapurkar is a conservation architect from Pune. She has researched extensively on the urban settlement of Paithan for her master's thesis on traditional maintenance systems of the vernacular houses of Paithan. She has also documented the weaving process of the Paithani for her Sahapedia UNESCO fellowship. Ruchita will be talking about inverted courtyard typology of Vada in Paithan in response to traditional industries. She will also highlight an interesting aspect of maintenance systems of Vada. Welcome, Ruchita.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruchita, and I'll be talking about the Vadas of Paitan and how they have evolved as a response to the traditional industry, which was the Paithani handloom weaving industry. So a Vada is a courtyard house which is specific to the region of Maharashtra. So they are similar to a Haveli, but they have very distinct characteristics and elements which can be termed as a different type of typology, which is a Vada. So they have open spaces which are integrated with the built spaces, and these open spaces can be situated at the front or the rear of the building, or they can be situated within the built form itself, which are known as the courtyards. So the next slide, please. The next slide. Yeah, thank you. So these are the space, these Vadas, they have very specific elements which define the spaces of the interior. The horizontal circulation of the Vada is through a series of spaces which are very definitive. And these have certain kind of terminologies. So the central courtyard was known as the Chowk, and there is semi-covered veranda around it, which was known as the Osri. So how a Vada is, it has other certain kind of elements such as the Devdi, which are the guard rooms, which are right at the entrance. There is also a middle room or a masghar, which defines the public space as well as the private space. And then we go on to the interior of the Vada, which has the more private kind of spaces, which are the kitchen spaces and the sleeping spaces, as well as spaces which are like the Devghar, which is a room to keep your gods, and as well as the in some Vadas, you can actually have multiple courtyards, whereas the interior courtyard is more for the family, whereas the external courtyard is more for the public. The next slide. Why the Vadas of Paitan are very different is because Paitan is known for its handloom sari, which is the Paithani, and this sari gained its prominence in the 17th and the 18th century, where we see the actual town of Paitan evolve. The next slide. So Paitan is situated around 60 kilometers south of Aurangabad, which is in the central part of Maharashtra, and it was one of the major trade centers where a lot of sahukars or traders used to live. They used to trade these saris and with major destinations from India. The next slide. So we see how the urban morphology of Paitan evolved. So we have certain settlements which came up as a response to these trading industries. And we have, when we plot it on a map, we see that the Sahukars and the traders or the moneylenders, they form the majority of the settlement, and they were right centrally located in the overall town. We also see a lot of settlements which came, which were related to not just the weaving industry, but also ancillary activities such as making the zar or dyeing the cloth, or even foreign traders or merchants who came and settled in Paitan. We also see a settlement which was specific to the agriculture and security workforce, which are situated more along the northern part of Paitan, as the southern and the eastern part, as well as the western part, are protected by the Godavari River. The next slide, please. So we see that the Vadas of Paitan, whereas most of the Vadas which we see in Maharashtra, they are mostly symmetrical in plan. We see that the Vadas of Paitan deviated, as the main concern for them was the security aspect as well as storage aspect for the traders. So what we see is a deviated entry, which was primarily aimed for as a sort of a protection against invaders, as well as we see certain elements such as a double height kitchen, which was again a very specific element in a Paitan Vada. And we also see niches and a lot of storage elements which were placed into walls, as well as we see a presence of a basement, as well as other small rooms which were for the sahukars and their staff to hold as office space. The next slide.
Suruchi? Suruchi, are you here?
So when we see the typology of vadas which we see in Python, they can be broadly classified into 3 types, which are the Sahukar vadas. Then there's there's a large presence of mutts or dharamshalas in Python, as it was also a holy town in the 17th and the 18th century. And we also see a lot of what I've termed as vernacular vadas, is or vadas which we see in the other areas of the settlement, where mostly the agricultural workforce or the weavers used to stay. So the distinctive point in all of these vadas is that the Sahukar vadas have a lot of ornamentation in them, as well as they are often of multiple courtyards. So the simplest of the vadas will have maybe 2 or 3 courtyards, but generally they will have heavily ornamented, the first courtyard will be heavily ornamented. The next slide. So we see such type of ornamentation in most of the Sahukar vadas in Python today, where the brackets and the columns, as well as the railings. The next slide. As well as the railings and the screens on the first floor, they are heavily ornamented and they are often made in teak wood. So this is one of the distinctive features of a Sahukar vada, and it's mostly seen in Python as. So the next slide. So most of these vadas are often introverted. So on the exterior, they have a very closed off profile elevation, and they have this another distinct characteristic of having stone up to the ground floor, and on the top of the first floor will be in brick. And they have smaller openings on the exterior and a very small doorway. The next slide. They also have a distinctive feature, which is a rounded corner. So this is also a feature which is seen primarily in Python vadas, where most of the vadas, they are placed along narrow streets and in a very organic, well, I could say organic and a grid pattern. But most of these are around corners and they have a very rounded corner. Next slide. While on the interior, most of these vadas are introverted. So we have like the courtyard of the chowk being the primary source of light and ventilation to these vadas. So the next slide. So this is how the hierarchy of spaces is present in a vada, which is where we can see the chowk is the primary open space. The area around it, which was the osri or the sopa, is semi-covered, and the rest of the spaces, they have very small, if at all they have windows, they are very small and high up, and otherwise they are completely covered. So there is no other source of light and ventilation except the chowk. We also see in the male and female usage of the vada, or even the public and the private spaces, the primary chowk was the public space. The guests were often limited to only the chowk and the sopa or the osri around it. The interior of the space is primarily the Swaipak Ghar, which was the kitchen, as well as the Madla Ghar and interior rooms were limited to the intimate members of the family. We also see that the entrance, at the entrance, there was a space designated for guards or servants to, or even as storage space. The next slide. So the weavers of Python, they were often patronized by these traders, and the traders from the traders used to ask these weavers to weave their saris, and then they used to go and trade it to the other cities. The next slide. So this is one of the hypotheses, is where these traders were patronized by the where the weavers were patronized by these traders. It is one of the hypotheses that these traders would provide weaving spaces to these weavers on the first floor of the vadas. But since no concurrence is seen in Python today, or if and since not a lot of weavers from are remaining in Python today, we cannot test out this hypothesis. Next slide. One of the unique interior elements in these vadas are these rooms which are right above the entrance of the Wada. So these rooms, since this Paithani sari is a very delicate fabric in terms of its silk, it needs to be stored at optimum temperature and at the moisture level, and it needs adequate ventilation for long to last long. These rooms are located. These rooms are located to store these Paithani saris right at the entrance of the Wada. Next slide. Another unique element is this basement, which we've seen in most of the Sahukar Vadas. So these basement was again used to store primarily raw materials which is needed in weaving these saris, but also to store grains and other materials which were, or food stuff which were needed in the house. Next slide. This was a maintenance program which was done by me as my master's thesis, where so each of these most of the Vadas in Maharashtra follow a certain calendar of Marathi festivals, and the maintenance or the annual maintenance of the house is done prior to these festivals. So what I had done was to correlate the maintenance cycle with the climatic cycle and also the festival cycle, and see how, for example, polishing the wood is correlated with the average humidity and temperature, and correlates with the time at which it is done. Next. That's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for introducing this new dimension, Ruchita. Our next speaker is Tanaya Verma. Tanaya Verma is an associate professor at Sushant School of Art and Architecture. She completed her bachelor's degree in architecture with honors from the Srimati Ratni Devi Purohit College for Architecture, Nagpur, from Nagpur University, and master's in architecture from YCM OU. Currently, she is pursuing her doctoral research on a study of climate-responsive vernacular architecture of Bikaner. Tanaya will be talking about Havelis in Bikaner as response to climate and people. Welcome, Tanaya.
Thank you, Neha. And I thank the presenters. It was a very wonderful and learning experience and a multi-dimensional perspective given by every speaker. So welcome everyone. And I'll be speaking about Havelis, and as a part of my PhD study. But this is one aspect which I want to take up later as a postdoc, because this was something which was very interesting to me. That was the architecture as a narrative for climate, space, and people. Suruchi, can the full slide be seen? Yeah. So I will be discussing that climate responsive architecture is one aspect that we all have been very conversant with, and truly agree that the vernacular Havelis or the Haveli architecture has really lived up to its name. But now we have to look at the current aspect also, as to what are the challenges faced by its occupant, or what are the complete package, I'll say, that Haveli, the lifestyle, the people, their jobs, their occupation, their livelihood, everything is in one complete whole. It cannot be looked at a separate entity as it is. Can we have the next slide? Yes. So to study these as a learning system, so there is lots of data available. Now data has to be sieved into information, and the information can be taken from the given context. Now in my case, I've taken Bikaner as a study, but this holds true for any context that you take. So there is lots of raw data available, which is in the form of information, which one has to extract and understand the context. In Yash's presentation, we have seen how he has beautifully narrated the entire context of Bikaner, and I'm going to take it from there, not repeating much of it. So Bikaner has a very harsh climate, and so as to say it has the harshest climate possible on Earth, because it has the solar radiation is 95% there. which is very high solar radiation. Now, next is the understanding or the knowledge. Now, knowledge is when there is an understanding and a certain tool or appliances are applied to it. The tools can be in terms of learnings, techniques, understanding the properties of material, how they function. All of that has to be put. All this you will see how the people or the native or the indigenous people have paid attention, and the knowledge has been built over ages, and this has been applied to the Havelis. Now, when the ability to discern, when the ability to understand this wisdom, to apply this wisdom comes, that is when decoding and applying this knowledge system to the built form. So the understanding or the harshness of the climate, understanding what is naturally available to them, what are the things that are paramount to their understanding has to be taken up, and then this knowledge system can be applied. Now, once all this is being understood and applied, in that intuitive form is like the sanskar or the value systems that get developed. Now, this is developed in the culture, the tradition, and the lifestyle of the people. There are various simple practices which the people practice, which shows that there is a certain respect for nature, their built form, their livelihoods that we are going to observe. Next slide, please. So, as we see, our lives are fast becoming instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent, and so are our homes and towns. Like today, we are in a virtual conference meeting and in the comfort of our own homes, and slowly all our homes are becoming Wi-Fi enabled and lots of new technologies. So this is the new way that we are going forward with. So change is the only constant. We cannot hold back time and choose to live in the nostalgia. So I'm not a conservation architect, so I might be having little radical thoughts with the conservation architect, but yes, I deserve a listening to. So lessons from the past have to be learned. They have to be applied in the present for a better future. Now, the current situation that we all are in really requires a new paradigm shift and a new changing. But we are still in the present. So whatever resources, whatever learning from the past, we are trying to incorporate and apply to the future. Suruchi, next slide, please. Just a brief, you have seen in Yash's presentation how Bikaner is placed. So now if you look at the climate, India is bestowed with 5 distinct type of climate zones. And if you see Bikaner, it comes under the hot and dry zone. Jaipur, as he has already mentioned, it is in the composite zone, and Bikaner is in the hot and dry zone, where hot and dry means the temperatures are mostly above 30 degrees and the humidity level is below 50. Now, if you see at the psychometric chart, it shows that hot and dry has these extreme climate change. Now, if we have such a thriving population in Bikaner, where the climate condition is such harsh, that means that the people were very intelligent to design houses which had comfort, and they had immense knowledge, and gave a clear blending between the climate, building, and the human factors for their built form. Next slide, please. This is the psychometric chart for Bikaner. So if you see that Bikaner has 79% hours, that is almost 6,000 hours, 6,000 plus hours of discomfort, whereas 21% of comfort hours in the whole year. So you can imagine that this kind of harsh weather, and you have such a thriving settlement in such harsh climate, it requires a careful study of their architecture and how they manage. And one more thing is that it is a non-river basin settlement. There is no river flowing in the Bikaner region, whereas we have always seen that a thriving settlement has always flourished near a river body. Whereas after the Ganga canal had been brought in, before that there was no river settlement, and they had small ponds and tanks within the city itself. Next, please. So I'm just basically going to touch upon the passive design strategies we have been learning in the School of Architecture as to lots of design, the built envelope, and the passive cooling techniques that can be incorporated in the built form. And the Havelis have got lots of these aspects which are already inbuilt. Now, after decoding the Havelis, these aspects have been documented in lots of climatological books and research papers. So these have been like the Havelis have been the textbook for our learnings. Next slide, please. Yes. Now talking about the space. Now this is a typical street pattern, or you will say the typical Bikaner as it exists now. And you can see that the small Havelis or the house forms exist close to the newer constructions as well. So it is a very dense jaw-like pattern. It's like a complete set of teeth. There is no space left between the plotted development, and there is no front yard or backyard. It right opens on to the street. And this is the current state of Bikaner, where there are lots of new development coming in the vicinity of the old Haveli construction. Next slide, please. So talking about the spaces and how, like, because if we see Bikaner, as I've already told, that it has a very harsh climate. Now the solar radiation is very high. So the main protection is from the sun. Then being in the desert area, there is lots of dust storms also that occur in this space. We have all been fantasizing and romanticizing about the jali patterns, but in Bikaner, there is lots of intricate carving, but there are no such jalis. It is depth carving, and they have wooden shutters on windows. The streets are very narrow. The courtyards are also very small as compared to any other settlement of Rajasthan or Haveli settlements that we see. They are small and they are tall, or I say slender. This helps in this has the advantage that the sun doesn't penetrate directly into the courtyard. And as we have seen that the courtyard is the central hub of the house. And basically all activities take place within the courtyards. The sections also, like if you see, there are small openings on the front and the rear side, whereas the Haveli is packed on most of them are packed on all three sides, barring the front facade which opens onto the road. Otherwise, they have openings into the courtyard or smaller openings onto the front facade side. So if you add to the current lifestyle, then the people are facing that nowadays, if they want to use the interior spaces, they have to use electrical light fixtures in the daytime as well. So earlier, because the daily routine was such that most of the times the day was spent in the courtyard or in the front room or the verandas adjoining the courtyards, the daily life was being, but now children are facing little issues because they want to have their own privacy. I'm going to show in the next slides also. Next slide, please. So talking about the spaces, so if the Haveli is like tightly packed and has a street on the side, so you can see the ratio that it has. So if the street section is very narrow, then the sunlight is typically not allowed into the street, and the whole day the streets can be very well conversant and used for. The sun heats up during the day, and at the night there is lots of cooling because of the Bernoulli effect, and the wind cools the interior spaces, and similarly those spaces are being used for sleeping and other activities. Usually people move on the above floors for sleeping. Otherwise, the day activity, the entire activity happens on the ground floor. Next, please. This is one of the Haveli's interiors, as you can see. This is not the romantic image that we have of how a Haveli has from the inside. This is how people are using it nowadays. They have their families, they have like the dining table you can see has come in the veranda next to the courtyard. There are The ceiling fan has been mounted up with an additional iron rod. Things have to be stored. A cooler is stored below it. So there is lots of alteration and adaptation that the people are doing. In one of the interviews that I had taken with the owner, they had this issue that the family, the kids wanted a big screen TV, a 42-inch TV in the house. Now the rooms were so narrow and small that it was not possible to install such a huge or a 42-inch television into the house. So these are living practical conditions that you have inside the house. Also, if you look at NBC or the National Building Codes, the indoor air quality in the deepest room or in the talgar or in the room where there is no windows. Now with the pollution and other closing up of the courtyards and keeping the windows shut, there is kind of stuffiness into the rooms which are at the rear. So these are some issues being faced by the occupants which are staying in these Havelis now. Next, please. These are some of the glimpses of the decorations, or these are again, these are features which help in making an ambient, comfortable conditions indoor. The lime plaster with the frescoes, the wooden ceiling. So this acts as thermal insulation. But these are now, for tourists, it is an attraction to look at. And for the people, they are saying, because the ceilings are low, sometimes it becomes difficult to hang the fan also. And it is easy money. So the people who is not visible. Yeah, sure. So the people are selling, as Yash has already mentioned, that these panels are very easy to remove, and there are karigars available in Bikaner, they are expert in Haveli Utarna. So they know how to catalog and they know how to dismantle and make a, it's like assembling and disassembling the entire pieces. Next, please. So what about these spaces? Like many people have shifted out from Bikaner. These are the images where like a Haveli has been dismantled and how neat a cut is. I think nowadays the modern builder or the modern people cannot dismantle a house so neatly as how the people in Bikaner have done it, because it's like a cake slice being removed from the entire pie. And you can see it's a very neat and it's a good section for the architects to study. Similarly, if you see the top left image, it says not for sale. This property belongs to 8 children of late Shri M.K. Lal Fumra. So there are lots of dispute. People have moved out and Havelis are locked and kept. There are lots of buyers for these Havelis. Similarly, the bigger ones like the Rampuriyas and the more elaborate Havelis, they have now been they have been as a protected monuments. You can see the cloth on the board. It was hidden, so they had put a cloth over it so that it doesn't show, because they were very unhappy about the fact that it has now become a protected monument and they are unable to touch or alter any part of it. So this is again a living challenge for these people in Bikaner, because Bikaner is very beautiful. It is having lots of architectural marvel, but it is still not in the tourist circuit, and they do not get as many tourists as Jaisalmer or Jaipur or Jodhpur is having. Next slide, please. So the people in this climate. So the climate, as I've told, is very harsh. This is a non-river basin settlement. So their tradition, their food, their culture, it is all woven around this climatic aspect. It is a trivia is that the water of Bikaner is special. That's why the bhujia tastes so crispy and good. And that is what the locals tell over there. They use lots of dried vegetables. khejri and other sangri. So these are being stored and dried, and most of the vegetables they get as dried vegetables for use. Similarly, mirchi vada, ghevar, rich sweets and heavy on ghee is being used. Similarly, people use like Akshay Tritiya was one festival where they have the water pots, and these water pots are changed on the occasion of Akshay Tritiya, and the newer ones are taken and they donate also. Also the pankha, the hand fan, is one thing that they give in this period of time. So these are small cultural linkages that we can see also to the climate, because the Jesht ka mahina jab itna usme it's so warm and it's so hot, the sun is there, that is the time when the pots and the fans are being inbuilt into the tradition. Also the concept of going to the bagichi, or ladies gathering under the peepal tree to tell stories during the daytime. Because it is becoming very hot, so they gather under the peepal tree, and it is known that it has lots of wind draft over there. Next slide, please. Now, this is my final slide where the entire gist of what I have said has come. So the weather and the climate has its effect on lots of parameters, be it the shelter, the housing, the occupation of the people, because this place was so harsh and barren that agriculture was not the main occupation. They were traders, they were merchants, and they were getting goods and licensing and selling it off. Some are mostly some are jewelers. The food is also affected by the climate. So the use of dried vegetables, lots of spices, hing, long, and very rich spices have been used in their food, because if you look at the bodily makeup also, that these food generate lots of heat in the body and we perspire. It in turns keeps the body cool by way of sweating and perspiration. The dress is also very light. We don't see heavy silk being used in day to day. It is the general pota doria, silk doria, malmal that is being used by the people. The climate and the weather also has an effect on the recreation and the activities that the people used to have. The front veranda or the stepped plinth was the place where people used to gather and talk around. Then the technology also developed, which was conducive to the area, like the stone that they used, the mud that they took. All of these were from the native period and from the native land. Now, once we have all these systems which are dependent on the weather, the climate, and the land, then it leads into the design, material, technological use, the primary and the secondary occupations, the production. And if we see all of these, they result in the social group. Now, how these make up the social group of the people, and the societal practices and norms and beliefs get developed out of these. Now, when these social groups and beliefs they develop, it results in the lifestyle. Now, if there is a lifestyle modification that takes place, it affects a backward flow. All of these are getting affected. Like there are modern houses where children have moved out, and because of education or for jobs, they are moving out of the region, far off places, even abroad. And when they come back, they are very, it takes time for them to get accustomed to the new form and tradition. The house itself, which they were comfortable with in terms of thermal comfort or in terms of their summer heat, but now they feel it takes time for them to get adjusted. So this is an entire whole package. It doesn't come as one thing like, oh, my temperature meter reads a certain temperature in the vernacular Haveli, so I should be feeling comfortable. It will not happen like that. It is the lifestyle that I lead. It is the clothing, the food pattern, the entire circle of my life has to be in tune with the climate as well as my built form. So it is just one aspect. So I think this gave a new perspective to your thoughts. And with this slide, I like to end here. It was nice presenting to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tanaya, for this interesting dimension. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Bhavna Dandona. Bhavna Dandona is a conservation architect and a faculty at Sushant School of Art and Architecture. Bhavna has an MSc in Historic Preservation from the University of Pennsylvania with specialization in architectural materials conservation and has worked on conservation projects in India and United States. She is the recipient of the Intact Research Scholarship towards her research on Lakhori brick. She has co-edited the book Haryana Cultural Heritage Guide. She has presented research papers on terrazzo from British period Delhi, concrete in Chandigarh, and earthen construction in Ladakh in various forums. Bhavna will be sharing with us the challenges faced by a Haveli owner in Delhi through her professional experience. Welcome, Bhavna.
Thank you for the really scholarly and very well-researched presentations so far. While these went into what's, whys, and history of Havelis, in my presentation, I will take you through examples of 2 Havelis and the experiences and very unique challenges, struggles of the owners with authorities when the Havelis were found to be labeled with the tag or were listed as a heritage or a protected property. I will try to bring out the lack of awareness and communication about these tags that property owners have to go through. And my disclaimer is just that these are case studies and I will leave these for you to interpret. I'm not going to make any analysis on these. So next slide, please, Suruchi.
Yes.
So the story starts by, I'll just start here. A Delhi-based couple who already ran a hotel business from a Haveli in Rajasthan thought of expanding their business in Old Delhi since one of them was raised in this part of the city. They decided to buy 2 Havelis, were trying to turn one into a guest house and the other into a space for orienting visitors about the history of Walled City. More like an interpretation center. So everything was planned and, money was paid, the Havelis were bought. But, the whole process was not so simple. So there is some good news and bad news. So we'll have to hear both. And let's start with not so good news. The Haveli on the left is the one that had more trouble. The Haveli on the right had no issues at all. So let's see what these issues are. Next, please. Suruchi?
Yeah, I've just changed the slide. Can you
All
see?
right, thanks. Yes. Just want to make sure I'm speaking the right things at the right time. So if you, for Haveli number 1, where the owners had a lot of issues, let's see what the background of the Haveli is. The Haveli belonged to Kashmiri Pandits who were initial owners since middle of 1800s. That is the time when a lot of Kashmiri inhabitants came to settle in this area. And this is Gali Pati Ram and Kucha Shah Mubarak in Old Delhi. They spent many years here, and then in around 2009 or just before that, they sold it to someone who turned this into a cultural hub. The central slides show, how it was. Gulzar is also present here. There are some very cultural evenings taking place and some singing and dancing and all that. So it ran for a cultural hub for a few years and then it was abandoned for a while. So this is a flashback before the owners bought the building. Next slide, Suruchi, please. As you can see in this image, the building is located in a very dense part of the walled city. The image on the left shows the map. And all the parts in Old City are very dense actually. But this was especially, it's a very, very narrow location. So some water from the neighbor's property started to percolate into the basement of this particular building, Haveli number 1, basically. And this started to settle the foundation or the basement floor of the building. So if you see the photograph on the right-hand side, it shows very clearly how this building is sagging. The roof is sagging and the columns are tilting. The tilted columns and sagging beams can't be more obvious. It's very, very obvious. But you still need a very, very, I would say, a professional eye to catch it. But this went unnoticed. Next slide, please. So what happens when you leave things to rot by themselves or just don't pay any attention? So the same thing happened to this building. A part of the building, the slide that I just showed you, collapsed. The big chunk of the building collapsed. The roof just fell down, and it was also covered by the media. Next slide, please. So once they started to repair, as you can see, the slide on the left-hand side shows that some repairs are going on. Some parts are showed so that they don't fall down. And on the right-hand side, the rightmost slide shows that the salvaged, there are some parts which were kept aside so that when the reconstruction takes place, they could install it again. So I'm still not using the word heritage here. Is this slide number 7, Suruchi? Okay, that's fine. So I think we can go to the next one. So while the works were taking place, some of the students from a college in Delhi and some faculty were taking a round of the neighborhood doing some study of Havelis, and they noticed these ongoing works, and they didn't think it was very appropriately done. So they reported to the authorities again, which is the MCD in this case. So now, as you can see, there is a red sign. The work was not completely done, but it was stopped. But why was it not appropriately done? We will try to learn in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So authorities come and shut down the work, and the authorities, MCD, also come and tell the owner that you need to see Heritage Conservation Committee. This is the first time they're hearing that their Haveli is a heritage Haveli, and a name of new authority like a Heritage Conservation Committee, which is very new to them. So the owners were a very aware bunch. They're very smart people, so they tried to check online first. They didn't go anywhere. They tried to check online, and they saw this organization called Heritage Conservation Committee, which looks after heritage buildings in Delhi. We are just talking about Delhi here. So then a whole new process of learnings began. HCC site had a lot of information and the list of buildings that are heritage, listed or protected. Next, please. So, if you go through the site, there's a lot going on. On the left-hand side, the highlighted part shows that there is a list of buildings there. So they try and open it up. Next slide. So these are all the list of the buildings, but they were unable to find their building. And it's very, very legitimate, when it's online and MCD is saying that your building is listed. What do I do? What do I do? It's such a dilemma. That's why this presentation is called Owner's Dilemma. Next one, please. All right, so we are smart people and we are going to look elsewhere if we can't find it here. The owners had a really hard time. They went to, I don't know how many offices in Delhi, and then finally they were able to find another list, which is called the supplementary list. And then this is where their Haveli was listed, and it's highlighted here. So ultimately, we find our Haveli online. Next, please. Now, if the Haveli is listed or protected or tagged, it is a grade 3 listed building, like it was written in the list. What do I do with it now? What am I supposed to do? Can I take care of it? Can I demolish it? Can I add a floor to it? Like what my original intent is, owners, sorry, not mine. So, so then, there are some guidelines given on the site which were followed, and sorry, one second. So if the building is listed, there were certain guidelines to be followed. Some rules were actually very clearly indicated on the website. In case people want to make changes, they can. So the good news is that they were allowed to make changes as long as they adhere to some guidelines. Next, please. So they hired a conservation architect because HCC mandated having a conservation architect on board. And trust me, all conservation architects are not conservative. In this case, it was me and a colleague of mine who is also present here right now. I will tell you later. So we were not conservative, and in fact, we are just more sensitive to the heritage rather than the other architects. That's all. Okay. So, so the conservation architect was hired who prepared all the proposals drawings, which means whatever the owners wanted to do was prepared as a proposal. A performa was filled out, which is a very long performa, not so long actually, 5 pages long, where you actually share what the intended use is and what changes will you be making, just to make sure. So we did that. I was the conservation architect, and the committee saw the proposal and we had to present it to them as well. Next slide, please. So because of some changes that they had done to the building, the work was stopped. So we had to make a case for actually starting the work again. So INTAC Intac had, sorry, I see all these pop-up messages. Sorry, it's distracting. Okay, so Intac had made this manual for homeowners, Intac Delhi chapter, with some consultancy from some conservation architects. And this had some really interesting statements saying that, you know, if you've done some work in the past, don't demolish it. Because that time the owners didn't know, they didn't have any knowledge or information. So thankfully, this was a very, very supportive document for the owners. Next, please. So these are some sections showing, if you see the upper section, top right hand side shows that there is a room added on top. You know, these sections were drawn in order to make sure that the HCC understands where the additions were taking place, where you know, we were taking care of just the repairs. So this was finally approved at last. So then the bad news turned into the good news, basically. This is the Haveli number 2, which was also, so this was comparatively smaller and very little work was to be done here. And no work or intervention had been done in the past, you know, just like the other Haveli we had. Haveli number 2 was pretty much a cakewalk as compared to Haveli number 1. Next, please. There were some changes proposed to accommodate the new functions like interpretation galleries, toilets, kitchenette, a very small kitchenette, not kitchen, just a place where you warm up things, and a courtyard cafe. So this drawing basically indicates the circulation pattern that was proposed and some new floorings. That's about it, because the flooring was demolished or sorry, deteriorated. Next one, please. There were 4 more main changes proposed to this building. The flooring was the main change. All the flooring was done in marble as proposed. Existing doors and windows were all repaired. They were colored. They were given a new color, and it was approved by HCC. All the blocked openings were opened, and new colors of plasters were introduced, which was also okay by them. Next slide, please. So if you see on the left hand side, it's the facade of the Haveli, a view of it's a render basically. And some colors were proposed, which was okay by HCC, and the upper floor was not touched for this proposal. On the right hand side, you see some elevations showing the door colors and the new flooring being added. Next slide, Suruchi. This is how basically the Haveli looked after, you know, it was cleaned out and, you know, just given some, you know, repairs and it's more like a, you know, upliftment of the Haveli. It was actually not in a bad condition at all, but to be made open to public, some work had to be done. So on the left is the before and on the right is the after. Next one, please. I think that's it. So we did get approval for both the buildings. Suruchi Shah was also helping me with this, and another person, an architect, Abdul Bahari, helped us with this. And 3 of us made a very good team. We were architects, conservation architects, and you know, the owners were very active. They also had architects with them. This was a few years ago, actually. I want to close by adding that awareness is a very significant aspect for heritage stock. Owners or users will always be puzzled, you know, if they don't know what to do. The communities are not shy to participate and engage as long as they know what to do. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much, Bhavna ma'am, for sharing these experiences of the owner. With this, we proceed further to our next session, where I would like to invite Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev, Dean SSA and Director of Architecture, Planning and Design Schools, Ansal University. Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev qualified as an architect from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi in 1989. After a period spent in practice and research in India, she undertook a PhD in architectural theory at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, completed in 1996. She was later a lecturer in history of art in the University of Sussex, a post that she left in 2004 to return to India. She has worked as an independent writer and a lecturer and as a consultant on conservation projects. Dr. Sachdev is an authority on Vastu Vidya. Many of her publications concern this or related knowledge systems and their expressions in architecture and art. She has worked extensively on the city of Jaipur, focusing on its architecture and craft traditions. Of the 4 books that she has written, she is the co-author of 2 books on the city, Building Jaipur and Jaipur City Palace. Dr. Sachdev has been a consultant on the restoration of the Jal Mahal in Jaipur. She was the design curator for the artwork of its pavilions and the co-curator of the exhibition Painted Pleasures. Her latest book is on the festivals at the Jaipur Court. He joined Sushant School of Art and Architecture, Ansal University in 2014 and continues here as Dean of SSA and as the director of the AU's Creative Cluster of Architecture, Planning and Design. I request Dr. Sachdev to share her reflections on our discussion so far. Welcome, Dr. Sachdev.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. Thank you, everyone, for participating and contributing to this really very important day for us, for Sushant, as Parul has just also indicated that we took on this task of Heritage Watch about 3 years ago, where we saw that there was, there were buildings who were, part of our childhood, part of everybody's childhood, part of our cultural and intellectual landscape that was fast disappearing before our eyes in the name of development. And it puzzles us every time we see Haveli disappear, a Baoli disappear, Chhatri disappear, a Sarai disappear in the name of parking, as to why development can't be in sync with our past. It is indeed troubling at times, depressing at times, and also to see that, no matter how much noise we make, we are actually not able to really make a dent. But that doesn't stop us from making noise, and we will continue to make noise. And this is what we have taken upon ourselves. And I congratulate the M.Arch Built Heritage Program for taking this lead and persevering in a very, very committed and dedicated way every year to highlight to the public, to the citizens of this country, the typologies, the buildings that are under threat from development. I mean, which is such an irony. Lost typologies, why a lost typology is important? Well, it's not just for the building, not just because the buildings are lost, or a building type is lost, or an interesting arrangement of brick and mortar is lost. It is what goes with it. It is what disappears where every time a building type is lost. What disappears with it is, the culture, the material culture. Buildings are storehouses of memory, storehouses of culture, storehouses of the excellence that is produced within that envelope. And I think all of you will relate to it even more now than before, because we're spending a lot of time in our homes. So a home is not just for walls, it's producing wonderful food, wonderful memories, wonderful relationships, textiles, arrangements, plants, how we decorate our homes. And so there is a soul that resides in this building, which manifests itself in the various cultural artifacts that one can see are tangible. And then, of course, there are lots of intangible storehouse of memory and stories that get lost. And just like that, I mean, and that is why it is important to revisit our past and take our past with us into the future, and keep these stories of buildings alive as much as possible. Keep talking about it, keep revisiting it, keep keep it alive for the next generation and for the future. It is very important to not let these stories in the form of buildings die. So I think that is, I mean, I think there is no, these are obvious points of, agreement that everybody will agree with. But also, I think if we look at, if we look at the courtyard house, which is what we are focusing on at the moment, a courtyard is a climatic response. And if you see in the, the tropical belt, there are lots of examples of courtyard houses. In Italy, you see, in an Italian villa, there'll be a central open space, which is such a wonderful thing to have a bit of your own sky within the home is so beautiful. And it's so important to have that private sky where you can feel the changes of season, not just changes of season within the day, how the sun moves. It's your internal clock, and to have that is such a super thing that the modern housing in the name of density or whatever, I don't know. I'm not totally convinced as to what the reason for apartments is. Well, it's modern, and you can have an ensuite loo, which is, how unhygienic, but but there we are. So, but that's not a reason why we can't continue to live in these beautiful houses and why they have to be pulled to the ground. So I'm going to just show you. I mean, I'm coming in last, so it's like all the good, erudite, very scholarly papers are over. Mine's like a dessert, so it'll be short and it'll be sweet, and I hope you will enjoy. I'm going to just show you one slide of a sort of a glimpse into what all is lost. And my work, is, because I work on traditional knowledge systems, I use a lot of resources like paintings, like literature, like songs, even like diaries, to just get into the mind of the user of these spaces. And actually, for me, for any modernist, the struggle is not to use the modernist lens when one is looking at these pre-modern or Havelis, and to kind of just understand, how they were used. And so if Suruchi or Neha can just put this slide on, and this is a painting I want to show you of it's not quite Haveli, but it's that type. And I hope it is it's certainly sort of a courtyard kind of type, which has a lot of open spaces. And if we, ours is not an indoor culture. Ours is an outdoor culture. We have a wonderful climate, wonderful, range of climate. Even when it's very hot, to spend a day under the, mango tree, which is, ripe, laden with fruit in the summer. It's such a wonderful, I mean, I spent my, as many of my colleagues must have, spent my childhood atop a mango tree, during summer holidays. I never felt hot. Probably youth, probably because I was young. But also, it is we love to spend time outdoors, and there's no need why we should be boxed in with the air conditioners on and to cool us down when there are these so many open outdoor spaces that you see in this slide, this painting, that you can use the roof, you can use the courtyard, you can use Charoka's windows are open. This is of course a night scene, full moon, Purnima. But what I want to show you is that, you know, our buildings wore clothes. Our buildings are not like what we see them today, bare skeletons. And we had this very, very rich envelope of textile that was used in a very dynamic way. So the courtyard would get covered when the sun changes, you know, the chhajjas will become longer. As you can see in the awning, you can increase or reduce the chhajjas according to the solar angle. It doesn't have to be static. You can pull the chicks down, you can pull them up. You can have on the roof, you can have, you know, textile canopies out. And the amount of textile that is used in this building is phenomenal, and you know that obviously changed according to the thermal comfort that one required. So it is, you know, buildings today have no such you know, dynamism in terms of design. That, and also in the courtyard, in the Haveli, of course, one moved according to how the sun was. So, you know, the bedrooms were in, you know, if it is the southwest, south, it was, you know, shaded, and you moved, you know, you east was where you move to in the morning. And, you know, the rising sun is of key importance to us culturally as well. And one moved along with the sun around the courtyard. And this movement within the house was just kind of second nature. And the house also kind of moved and you know, swelled and shrunk according to the sun, according to the shading required, according to whether it was raining or not raining. So I just wanted to show you this slide as to, you know, when a building like this is lost, you lose so much. You lose, you know, the textiles, the ephemeral things that are not, the impermanent things that are not, you know, that don't outlast. So, you know, wooden things, textiles, you know, this kind of congregational spaces, how to use them. So I just wanted to show you this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev. This was a really interesting discussion and interesting dimension, I would say.
Thank you.
So with a wide range of discussions that we have had today in the effort of decoding the Haveli, I'm sure our participants in the audience must have a lot of questions to ask. Before I open the floor to the questions, I would like to bring your attention to our associated event, #Haveli, and it closes soon, tomorrow, that is 10th of May 2020. So do hurry in, send in your entries, and you can know more about this by following our FB page that you can see on the right side. It's called Art Build Heritage, and also the Instagram handle called Build Heritage. So these are the links. You can please follow us. And like I had said in the beginning, that this is just one of the events in our initiative. So we'll soon be announcing our next webinar on Chaupals and similar such associated events. Well, I'm also reading some comments given by our participants, and they're really encouraging. So I'm thankful for that. Okay, I think some questions were asked on the chat, and our experts had answered it simultaneously. So in case we don't have more, then I would like Neha to conclude the session.
With this, we come to an end of our event. I hope these discussions engaged you and we all learned a lot more about Haveli as a building typology. Please do participate in our webinar of Chaupals as well, and do send in your entries for #Haveli. Good night and thank you. See you all soon.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the encouragement and support in the comments.